Great. So welcome everyone to this London Policy and Strategy Network, which is going to be focused on what we might see from the comprehensive spending review and the levelling up agenda, with both a national perspective, but also a regional perspective as well from London. As there's quite a few of us today, we're not going to do introductions verbally, apart from Graham and Michelle, our speakers, but do introduce yourselves in the chat, kind of who you are and where you're from, and also what brings you here today. Are you an expert at the levelling up agenda? In case, do let us know. Or are you just curious, or are you kind of, or are you in between? We know kind of quite a few people are coming from London and quite a few from local government, but we've also got people from other organisations and sectors and also other regions as well. And so that kind of national and regional perspective, I think, will be really important. So we'll kick off with a couple of presentations. And then we'll have an opportunity for people to ask Michelle and Graham questions. And then there'll be a couple of questions kind of for yourselves in the chats that we can continue that discussion as well. But I'd like to introduce Graham and Michelle. So Graham is Associate Director at the Institute for Government and is going to present first. And Dr. Michelle Reeves is Senior Manager Policy and Programmes in the GLA's strategy team within the City Intelligence Unit. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Graham, who's going to take us through a national perspective. Over to you, Graham.
Great, thanks, Dol, and thanks for the invite. It's really nice to come and speak to people who work in local government, as well as kind of stare from afar at the data and try and work out what it all means. So for those of you who don't know, the Institute for Government are an independent think tank. We're a charity, and most of our funding comes from the Sainsbury Foundation. I'm going to try and talk for about 10 minutes and answer three things. What is a spending review? What is going on with this spending review? And what does it all mean for local authorities? I'll try and leave some questions at the end for whether there's a difference, because there is, between local authorities in different parts of the country. But those broadly are the three things I'm going to try and cover. So I'm going to share my slides now and get into it. So Noel, can you just confirm that is coming up okay?
Yeah, it's all good.
Perfect. So as I said, three things, a bit of context about what spending review is, because I think it's not actually totally clear. It's a bit of a weird thing. Then I'm going to talk a bit about what's going on this year and what it's likely to mean. So I'm sure this will be very familiar to most of you, but I thought it was just worth saying a little bit about what has happened to public services and in what state do we enter this pandemic. So if we start with some of the positives, it's always good to start there. I think COVID has prompted some new ways of working. So we've seen, not just in local government, but in lots of different public services, a large amount of innovation in a very short period of time, largely related to doing things remotely. In some cases, that's providing services, so thinking GP appointments or child protection conferences virtually, and in other cases, just working from home on other aspects. Perhaps a slightly contentious, but also important, I think short-term point, is that some recruitment and retention have temporarily got better during the pandemic, and I stress temporarily. The reason for that is looking across lots of public services, we can see higher rates of recruitment and higher rates of retention, at least throughout the 2020 year, which I suspect is largely to do with the worsening state of the private sector labour market. Of course, at the same time, we all know COVID has created new demands on different kinds of services. It's quite clear in healthcare, where kind of the management of COVID as an endemic disease is going to take up quite a lot of time and require providing new services. But that's also, of course, true of some of the kind of social and then economic services that local government provides as well. Related to that, services, mostly because of infection prevention and control, are likely to cost more to run, at least in the short term. And really notably, we can see backlogs that have kind of built up as a result of services not operating normally. And here I'm thinking about long elective waiting lists in the NHS, or kind of the face-to-face learning time that pupils have lost in schools, or perhaps in local government. I mean, some of the less noted ones, like the fact that food hygiene inspections kind of there's a large backlog of businesses waiting to be rated as a result of the fact that lots of environmental health teams haven't been able to do face-to-face inspections in the normal way that they would. So clearly we're kind of entering the spending review after a pandemic in which, for the most part, although there have been some positive changes, things are a lot harder. So I'm going to just use a little bit of technical lingo to explain exactly what a spending review is. Broadly speaking, a spending review is where the government sets out how much money it wants to spend on different public services over the course of a parliament. They set something called DEL budgets. DEL stands for Departmental Expenditure Limit, not the most catchy thing in the world, but that's about half of government spending. And broadly, it's thought of as spending you can either choose to do or choose not to do. So it made up, at least in 2019-20, just under half of government spending. The rest of it, which this spending review will have nothing to say with and won't affect decisions on, is something called annually managed expenditure. And that's largely things that government has committed to provide, and you can't really change the level of spending once they're in train. So pensions and welfare benefits are a good example. Once you set the level that they're at, how much you pay out relates to kind of how many people are eligible for pensions and how many people are eligible for welfare. So roughly kind of half of all government spending is in play for the spending review. That's what the government is kind of talking about doing. These have been around since 1998. So broadly speaking, they're an innovation that are designed to try and help government plan better when it decides how much to spend. In this chart, like a darker blue indicates a higher level of spending increase, and a pink indicates a cut. So we can see kind of they were particularly generous around the mid-2000s, and then kind of as I'm sure all of you will be completely aware, spending reviews after 2010 and the settlements given to local government and other public services have been less generous and cut in real terms, at least between 2010 and 2019. From a local government perspective, I think it's worth saying, because spending reviews set DEL budgets, that means they affect different departments within Whitehall differently. From a local government perspective, it is really kind of MHCLG, you can see there in the bottom left, which has a big blue box for resource DEL. That's local government grants, amongst other things. That's one of the key things this spending review will determine. And likewise, kind of in a couple of capital-dominated departments in transport, business, energy, industrial strategy, some of those capital grants, again, will be they will be kind of set so that local authorities can bid from them. So probably MHCLG, DFT, BAYS are going to be the key departments, and their settlements will be the ones to watch at the spending review for local government. So that's broadly what a spending review is. In terms of this particular one, it's worth saying that the big picture is that the government is going to spend more money, and it's going to increase in real terms compared to 2010 and 2015. So if we just look at total government spending, it was basically falling by about 2% between 2010 and 2015. The 2015 to 2019 spending review was a very, very small real terms increase. Then we have COVID. That blue line shooting up kind of largely represents all of the emergency spending that happened at the start, and the purple dashed line roughly tells you what government spending, excluding all of the emergency schemes, would have been. And then if we look at the upcoming spending review, the government said it's going to spend about 2.5% more per year. So compared to at least the last decade, the spending settlement looks a lot more generous. There's going to be a lot more money going in on day-to-day spending. Now, it's worth saying in practice, that's perhaps not as good a message as it seems. So once we start to take away some of the money that's already been allocated, it's not quite as clear. So again, this is just showing you the total amount of money the government plans to spend on day-to-day services each year from this year up to the end of the Parliament. We can take out money going towards NHS England and towards the rest of the Department of Health and Social Care. A small amount of that is for a social care grant, but that's only to do with reform of social care. We can then take away the money that's been allocated for schools and that allocated for defence and aid, and you can see that remaining blue bar actually isn't increasing very much in real terms, and it's actually going to decrease between this current financial year and the next one. So really, although a lot of money is to be decided at the spending review, the government's actually taken most of these decisions already. And again, if we look at the percentage change rather than the amount, you can kind of see total spending is going up a bit. It's going up particularly fast for the NHS. In schools, it appears to be decreasing. I can explain that, but it's largely to do with the fact that there are going to be fewer pupils in school in England. So to keep per pupil spending at the same level, you can actually cut spending overall a little bit. Defence spending is going down because most of the increase was for capital rather than day-to-day, and aid spending is going up a bit. So if we just look then at the remaining blue bar, what we can see is it's likely to be a real terms cut next year, and then it's slowly going to increase a bit. So that is to say, by the end of this parliament, unprotected spending will be higher than it is right now, but it's going to go down a bit first. So that increase is backloaded. It's really only towards 2024 that unprotected services are going to actually see spending increases. I'm going to come back to that point because I think that's really quite important. In terms of what this means for local authorities, and I think what it's worth considering, the first point, as I said, is that these spending increases are likely to be backloaded. So of the money that goes to local government that comes from central government, the grants, to not council tax and not business rates, that money is likely to come in towards the end of this parliament. And I suppose the reason I think that's worth thinking about is when you think about transformation programs or kind of big investor save programs, they often come with an upfront cost and deliver savings later on. Also, that's the theory. I and the Institute for Government think it would be more sensible to front load the spending, but I think, we have to approach and deal with the world as it is rather than as we would like it to be. And I think it's very likely the government is going to stick to these spending plans. So if I were in local government, I would be trying to think about what are the areas where I might not be able to spend money right now, but if I knew I had some coming in a couple of years, what would be the valuable investments I'd make towards the end of the period? I think that's going to be one implication of the spending review. That's likely to be when local government spending, there will be more money around. It'll be towards the end of that parliament. So once the spending review is confirmed, which will be on the 27th of October, and the local authority spending settlement, which is likely to come in December, will come out, that I think should be the key question officers and councillors are asking themselves. What could we do with this money that's coming on later? The second is kind of dull and perhaps obvious, but there's not a lot of extra money going in. There are a lot of extra demands on public services that local government delivers. What are the priorities? What are the things that will make the biggest difference to levelling up and or the biggest backlogs that need to be tackled? It's very obvious, and there's a lot of political attention that goes towards the visible ones like waiting lists, but clearly there are big pressures in local government, in particular around, say, levels of referrals to children's social care and what might be done to kind of help support children and families that have been perhaps not identified during the pandemic. So I think that's the second implication. I think the third, and I know no one wants to talk about efficiency savings, and it's totally reasonable not to. It's been an extremely tough decade. But if the spending review is as tight as kind of it implies, it is worth thinking about what of the pandemic changes that have happened, differences in working from home, new ways of delivering services could be kept, because I think that is the area worth looking at when it comes to thinking about how to square, I suppose, the circle of the rising demands on local authorities with the lack of extra money coming in. So I apologise if that's not a cheery picture, but I do think it is worth trying to approach what is likely to happen rather than what we might want to happen. And sorry, I'm circulating these slides later. All of the material I've talked about is kind of online and available at the IFG's website, and it's here. I'm going to stop speaking now, so you can definitely keep to time and stop sharing my slides.
Great, thank you very much, Graham. That was a really sobering set of slides, but really great to be able to see the actual reality behind the potential headlines when people talk about spending increases and what that actually means and who for. And I'm sure people will have a lot of questions about that, which I would kind of hold on to. You can start adding them into the chat. And we can come back at the end of Michelle's presentation to take questions about both. But I want to hand over to Michelle to talk us through the London perspective.
Thanks, Noel, and thanks to everyone for inviting me to speak today. Just to let you know, I am stepping in for Jeremy Skinner, who's our assistant director, who isn't able to be with us today. So I'll just start to share my slides. Let me know if you can see those. Can you see those?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Great. So what I want to do in my presentation quickly is to talk about London's levelling up position and the case for London, and then just provide some headlines on the GLA's CSR bid and key asks. So I think the first thing to say is that for the Mayor and the GLA, sort of making London's case for levelling up and our comprehensive spending review bid are overlapping pieces of work. And what we've tried to do is to take a pan-London unified approach, working with a whole range of London's leaders, whether that's across the business sector, public sector, civil society, and also with anchor institutions. We feel that a partnership approach is the most appropriate way to get the most particularly out of the spending review, but also as we progress our work around recovery, then I think what we're anticipating is that if we come together to pool our resources, to pool our expertise, to build on our levers, then we will stand a much greater chance in building back better in terms of the Mayor's ambitions to make London to be a fairer, sort of safer, cleaner, greener, more prosperous city for all Londoners. So we've been using the London Recovery Board, which we established in partnership with London councils earlier in 2020, as a sort of key convening space for bringing together all of those perspectives across different sectors, as I say, across different actors, and so that we can look at how we align our activities. In terms of the sort of unified London position, I think the first thing to say is that the Mayor supports the government's ambition to level up all parts of the country, and particularly those that have been left behind for too long. I think we believe that it's vital that government works to level up both not only towns and cities, but also level up between regions. And I think certainly our perspective is that if we level up together, as we recover from the pandemic, then this is going to benefit the whole of the country, including London. It isn't a zero-sum game. In terms of sort of the recovery from COVID, I mean, the London Recovery Board set a grand challenge in partnership with London councils and the boroughs to rebuild the capital as a safer, greener and fairer city. And a key tenet of the Mayor's sort of second term has been around building bridges, using this moment to reset the relationship with national government and to take this partnership approach. So why does the capital need levelling up? I think it's fair to say that we all know that London's economy is the engine of the national economy, but I think the key point to also recognise that London's economy is more connected than ever to other regional economies, and what that means is that through supply chains and through networks, when London grows, other regions of the UK grow, and vice versa. When other regions of the UK grow, then so does London benefit. So there definitely is an interrelationship between the regions. It isn't a zero-sum game. But a key point is that London itself, and I think it's a point that certainly was recognised by Neil O'Brien in his opinion piece in The Guardian yesterday, London itself, whilst undoubtedly including sort of areas of wealth, it also has pockets of extreme deprivation. So London itself does need levelling up. In terms of, in fact, some of the statistics in terms of making the case for London. So again, once housing costs are taken into account, London is in fact the most unequal region in the UK. Again, taking housing costs into account, 27% of Londoners are in poverty, and nearly 4 in 10 children are living in poverty. So this is the sort of reality of some parts of the capital. Again, further statistics show that half of households in the poorest half of households in London own just 4% of wealth compared to 9% in other regions. Moving further on. And then on unemployment, employment in London has been higher than the rest of the UK for decades, and again has been exacerbated by the pandemic, and rates of unemployment have had the steepest rise in the capital. Again, what we've seen with COVID is it's also exacerbated some long-standing sort of structural inequalities for particular groups, including sort of young workers, older workers, workers on low incomes, and BAME Londoners. So there are also stark inequalities in health and life expectancy. So, for example, a child born in poverty in Lewisham or Stratford is blighted by deprivation and inequality in much the same way as a child in Sheffield or Leeds. So there are some sort of commonalities in that experience of inequality and poverty right across the country. Turning to our spending review, again, what the Mayor has done is to focus on defending the baseline. So many of you will know that London has, through the mayoralty, has delegation of the adult education budget, and that has allowed London to sort of tailor its skills and employment schemes, working with employers' organisations and providers to tailor the skills and employment system so that it better meets the needs of employers in London. But also, I think what we've also been able to do through the mayoralties is to maintain funding settlements for TfL, Met Police and LFB. These sort of baselines are sort of under threat, and particularly the lack of a sort of sustainable settlement for TfL, which again is one of the key priorities for the business community. Transport connectivity is incredibly important for London's economy. So what we've done is try to focus on the baseline, make sure that we maintain that, but also secure additional funding to build on the successes and the track record that we've had in particularly around the adult education budget, but then also to focus on a handful of big ticket items which map onto the Mayor's 5 priorities. And the Mayor's 5 priorities for this term are keeping London safe, again, achieving that sustainable multi-year funding deal for TfL, delivering housing to support community-led housing, also tackling homelessness and protecting leaseholders post-Grenfell, education and skills, and looking at whether we can secure a single funding plan so that we address all of the sort of the skills element. I think what we're asking for is all of the skills element from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and other funds to be delegated or devolved to London again, so that we can enhance the tailored approach. Obviously, we're looking at economic recovery. As you'll know, the central activity zone in London has been extremely hard hit by the pandemic, and so it's going to be really, really important that we have investment to secure to attract both business and domestic tourists and leisure tourists back into London as the gateway to tourism in other parts of the country. And then last but not least, then environment. Obviously, that's a huge challenge if we are to meet our targets for net zero by 2030. And the focus there is on around a sort of a really large scale retrofit programme. And just a little bit more on some of those priorities. Again, as I said, in terms of keeping London safe, the main ask is around resourcing and securing a multi-year funding deals for the Met Police and for the Fire Brigade. Again, priorities around funding for crime prevention and reduction, support for victims in relation to fire and resilience, again, looking to address some of the issues around post-Grenfell, but then also long-standing sort of stresses around London's ability to withstand some issues around climate change. So really strengthening our flood risk capability. On transport and housing, again, that sustainable multi-fold deal for TfL. In terms of housing, what we're looking for is additional funding for affordable housing and to tackle homelessness, but also looking at infrastructure and connectivity investment to support future housing growth. And then quickly on skills, education, and economic recovery, seeking to retain the delegation around the adult education budget, but then also looking at further delegation or devolution of skills element of the 19 to 24 traineeships, boot camps, and shared prosperity fund, and also looking to have support, have responsibility for the skills improvement plans. And the idea is that through a single skills fund, that would enable us to efficiently build on the existing delegation from AAB. And then tourism, we're looking at a figure of 56 million over 2 years for that international marketing campaign, and also further investment in a key anchor, a key cultural anchor in East London, the Education and Cultural District at East Bank. Again, we're looking at the government supporting transitional rates relief beyond 1st of April and seeking early announcements for business rate allocations to local authorities. And then on the environment, again, we talked about a retrofit revolution to address sort of net zero, and also to support the decarbonisation both of domestic housing, public buildings and transport, investment in green finance and tackling flood risks from climate change. I think that's, yeah, so I think that's it. As I said earlier in the presentation, we have, the Mayor has sort of acted as a convener in bringing together all partners to develop a unified London position around levelling up, and you can see that at the first link. We've also got a lot of data around the impacts, particularly of the pandemic in relation to London. So yeah, I think I'll end my presentation there and happy to take questions.
Great. Wow. Thank you very much, Michelle. That was a really great presentation and really good to see some of the commitments that the GLA are making. People do add questions in the chat for both Graham and Michelle. I've got a question actually for both of you, but starting from some of your slides, Graham, about actually where there are spending increases, it's potentially in areas like health and schools, and not necessarily local government, but those players do actually operate in local areas, be it the NHS and schools. So as well as what local government does with the money it's directly given, either now or further down the line, I guess what can we do to kind of better work across with those partners to be able to leverage investment into our local places?
I think there's two answers that I would give to that. The one is kind of the generic public policy. It's nice to play nicely together, and there's opportunities to do that. And obviously, I distinguish schools and local government because of the funding streams, but obviously local government does actually maintain and run a lot of schools, so it's a bit artificial. With the NHS, I suppose the upcoming health and care bill, and getting local representation on integrated care systems, it's very hard to work out what really works with that. But my impression from talking with kind of council members who are on health and wellbeing boards and who also sit on the integrated care, I always get the acronym wrong, system, I think, boards, seem to find that quite useful. And then there's maybe the hard-nosed answer, which is like, well, some of this cash is going to the NHS, but there's probably creative ways you can interpret the commissioning, and other processes to try and make sure some of the money can kind of is for the NHS but is being spent on social care schemes. And obviously there are particular budgets that do that, like the Better Care Fund. But I would have thought trying to work with your NHS partners and working out what they can commission local government to do and use some of that money to do is probably a productive place to start. Sorry, it's a bit of a fluffy answer. I'm not sure I have a great response.
No, really good. How about you, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd echo what Graham said in terms of, I think there's real opportunities for more collaboration. I think, again, through the London Recovery Board, we've set up a strand of work working with anchor institutions, of which the NHS have actually led on that work. And so I think, there is a sort of structured opportunity to work together on this agenda. So I would say that, looking at how we can use the sort of collective levers of the different partners within a sort of anchors program is probably the best opportunity.
So there's a bit of discussion in the chat about about remote working. So you're more than welcome to answer questions about that both. I guess I had that kind of, it made me think about how we use evidence, because that you can take an issue and spin it a variety of different ways depending on the case for change that you want to build. So I guess kind of both of your thoughts on kind of what's most effective in terms of use of evidence to really build a case for change. I don't mean for kind of the comprehensive spending review per se, because obviously the submissions are closed, but for particularly with the levelling up agenda, which is perhaps there's going to be more meat on the bones. How can local areas build up a stronger evidence base about actually not kind of the needs that they've got in kind of in the local area, but also the potential and the evidence of a track record that they've built up as well on kind of particular issues. So yeah, it'd be good to get any thoughts you might have on that. But you might also want to answer any specific questions on remote working in the chat as well.
Michelle, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think one opportunity is some work that's been sort of spearheaded through the London Recovery Programme, and it's in relation to one of the particular recovery missions called High Streets for All mission, and a piece of work that's been developed there is called the sort of High Streets Data Partnership, which doesn't sound particularly sexy, but what that's actually doing is enabling. It's a mechanism which is enabling, GLA, boroughs, other sort of local actors to share data, to sort of share raw data to actually enable them all to collectively to sort of see what's happening in their high street, to capture sort of information about sort of footfall, about what's happening in the high street. And I think there's a real role for the use of sort of data, to help sort of drive sort of more responsive policy making. So I would say, and again, that sort of approach to sort of sharing data has been at the sort of behind the sort of setup of a Lottie, which is a local, which again is mainly been developed for sharing information across local authorities. So I guess I think one opportunity is about joining Lottie and similar sort of schemes to actually share that information across sort of borough boundaries.
Great.
I just say on remote working, I don't want to opine on it because I don't think I have any particularly useful insights. But when I was talking about efficiencies earlier, it's not that I think there's a huge amount of cash that you can save from remote working, but I was just trying to think through, like, if this is the case, like, what are the areas that you might do this? And clearly, yes, like if you make an efficiency by just cramming people into poor housing, that does have a massive impact on the flexibility and inclusivity of your workforce, and probably a very bad one. On evaluation and bidding for levelling up funds and other things, it's really hard to say because I don't think the government really actually understands what it is it wants to do with levelling up, whether it's about levelling up people or levelling up places and levelling up what exactly. Um, I think in general for bids, my broad interpretation of what Whitehall likes, because Whitehall is a bit centralising and controlling. I'm sure you've all been on the receiving end of many a late night bid and other things with incredibly restrictive criteria. To show that you can evaluate what you've done, that you're using data, and that you can use it in an open way. It's always nice if you don't just get someone's business case PDF, but you can actually say, okay, these are where the numbers are from, and I could just go back and replicate it if I would like. My impression is that probably makes a difference on the margin of whether your bid is going to be successful or not. But I think until the government is clear about what it wants to do, not sure what would make for a good bid or not.
Thanks, Graham. There's a question which is specifically about the Shared Prosperity Fund and the Community Renewal Fund, and I've also learnt a new acronym which I think stands for Department for Levelling Up Housing in Communities. Ironically, doesn't include local government anymore. So, well, I mean, yeah. Well, whether that's kind of whether that's symbolic or not, but is a. So actually, I'll ask a question about that later. But there's a specific question about shared prosperity fund and community renewal fund in terms of like how that's evolving. So either or both, Michelle and Graham, if you want to comment on that.
I mean, I'm happy to ask. I mean, my colleague Navprit in the chat has mentioned some work that GL Economics has done. Obviously, in terms of the Levelling Up Fund, London wasn't particularly, didn't particularly benefit from some of the funds that have been identified. For example, Levelling Up Fund, it was only Barking and Dagenham that were eligible. Some of the other funds, UK Community Renewal Fund, again, not eligible. London wasn't eligible. So again, I think there is a concern that, despite the government sort of saying it doesn't want to cut off the tall poppies, that, all things being equal, that, London may lose out, if these indications are, if those sort of indications continue. But I think what Navprit's referring to is that we've done some work which looked at the index for multiple deprivation and looked at the sort of metrics that you could use for levelling up, and we're using that information to try and influence the government. Obviously, it has over the last couple of days sort of enunciated a little bit more about what it means by levelling up. It's talking about empowering local leaders, it's talking about growing the private sector and raising living standards, it's talking about spreading opportunity and improving public services and restoring public pride. Again, these are all sort of tenets of past regeneration programmes, from City Challenge, Single Regeneration Budget, etc. And so I think there will be experience from local authorities about the appropriate metrics to use for those different types of outcomes, but certainly GLA Economics has been active in trying to influence the metrics around that, because I understand within the levelling up unit, they are still working through how they're actually going to measure the outcome, so that there potentially is still an opportunity to influence that thinking.
I'm afraid I don't have anything I think useful to add on top of that.
No, that's all good. Before we get into breakouts, a kind of perhaps more a serious question than the kind of the leaving out of local government from the title of the new department. And kind of you started talking about it, Michelle, with the levelling up task force. It kind of does feel that perhaps there's going to be perhaps more serious thinking about what the levelling up actually means, and what goes into that box and kind of what sits out, because currently is kind of it is used for things that as specific as particular funds, and then also as catchphrases for anything that kind of the government might want to talk about, but also that think tanks might want to associate to get people to their conferences. And obviously this event was kind of more focused on that. But I don't know, both in terms of what you think kind of that might mean for the levelling up agenda, and how, because I'm conscious we don't just have local government organisations here, we've also got other organisations, but what that might mean for how organisations and sectors might kind of lobby around what the levelling up agenda should mean from their own perspective, which obviously the GLA has done. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Graham, do you have any?
I can have a go. I mean, I think with anything where basically the term is undefined, the lobbying effort goes into framing it. I'm still not sure what the frame of the government is. I think if I was sat in the GLA or one of the London local authorities, the case I would be making is that, you know, it's levelling up is about improving opportunities for people, not places, right? So, or it should be about people, not places, because we do care that people from all around the country should have the best outcomes they have, but we want to target that in a way that actually targets those people rather than particular areas. That is what I would be doing if I was in that position. For what it's worth, also, DLUC is a horrible name, and I think they should have added levelling up to the end of MHCLG, because then you could have called it Mahoka Logaloo. But yes, I'm not in Whitehall, so I didn't get to make that decision.
I think they call it deluxe, actually, but no.
Yeah.
How about you, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously, you know, as we go up to the spending review, then we will be looking at doing quite a lot of pan-London lobbying and advocacy. And I think, I mean, just looking at, for example, London Council's CSR bit and the Mayor of London, I mean, there are some sort of common areas of interest, particularly around sort of opportunities for young people, around supporting sort of this, you know, retrofit revolution, around unlocking housing through infrastructure and supporting global Britain. So an obvious point of intervention is about actually pulling those different asks together, you know, so that you know, we can make a stronger collective you know, lobby and advocacy to the government around those sort of things where there is common interest and there is a common cause, and that's something that we are going to be doing over the next sort of couple of weeks. You know, we are going to be reaching out to a range of sort of London stakeholders, looking at how we might align with their particular asks, but also looking at where different sectors, different actors, you know, whether that's the business community or whether it's, you know, HEIs in our anchor institutions, whether they can lobby on behalf of London as part of sort of you know, the national recovery.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Michelle. And when I hear the word DLUC, it kind of almost sounds like bad luck, but that's for another time. We're going to go into breakouts for about 10 minutes before we finish up, because I'm conscious, you know, there's a big room of people, and be really good to hear from each other's kind of reflections on this presentation, and kind of what are the risks and opportunities that you see for your organisations in terms of both the comprehensive spending review, but also the levelling up agenda. And kind of the second question, which is, from a London perspective, how can we kind of work more closely together, whether we are local authorities working with the GLA, or, you know, with the scene there's a few universities and other representative bodies on the call as well, because I think you know, London is kind of is theoretically you kind of the might be perceived as the bad guy in the levelling up agenda, whereas as Michelle kind of set out, actually, if we break it down, there's you know, kind of London can play a really important part, both in terms of its own needs, but also the opportunities around that. So I'm going to create some breakout rooms. So bear with me while the kind of the tech operates. You'll have also seen colleagues from the GLA have put in links to a variety of different kind of programs that the GLA are running, partly on specific questions that were raised, as well as the London recovery programme as well. So we're going to go into breakout rooms, and we're going to come back at 5:02 and just share next steps. So you should be starting to move from the main session into your breakout groups.